Hello everyone. In the previous lecture, we saw the theory of Rasa proposed by Bhatta Lollada. Today, we are going to see Śri Śaṅkuka's theory of Rasa and his systematic refutation of Lollada's view. Before that, let's take a look at the life of Shankuka. Like Bhatta Lollada, Śri Śaṅkuka is also a critic who remains in the darkness. Our knowledge about Shankuka and his contribution is primarily through the works of other writers. Kalhana, in his Raja-tarangani, talks about a poet named Shankuka who authored a court poem named Bhuvanabhyudaya, or the Triumph of the World. We have all the reasons to believe that this Shankuka, who is considered the author of Bhuvanabhyudaya, is the same person we are dealing with. Kalhana's Raja-tarangani says that in 850 CE, during the reign of King Ajitapada, a fierce battle took place between two royal factions, and the poet Shankuka composed a poem titled Bhuvanabhyudaya about this battle. A few verses preserved in an important 15th century anthology are ascribed to a poet named Shankuka, who is described as the son of Mayura. It is possible that this Mayura, who is considered the father of Shankuka, could be the author of the poem Surya Shataka, but we have no way to ascertain this fact. Pollock says that a late 12th century or 13th century dramaturgical work refers to Śri Śaṅkuka as a minister who was also a dramatist. As per this text, this particular Shankuka had also authored a romantic comedy, Citra-turaga-nyāya, the erring of the many-colored lotus. So we know practically nothing about Shankuka other than these basic pieces of information. If we piece together all the basic information that we have about Shankuka, we can say that Shankuka lived before Anandavardhana. As in the case of Bhatta Lollada, we also lost Shankuka's commentary on Bharata's Natyashastra. All that we have now to understand the view of Shankuka on the theory of Rasa are a few quotations preserved by Abhinavagupta in his Abhinava Bharati and Lojana on Anandavardhana's Dhvanyaloka. We need to note here that Abhinava is not simply referencing the views of Shankuka, rather he also opposes him at every point. Scholars often opine that Śri Śaṅkuka may have been a Buddhist. This observation is worth renewed consideration. There are various pieces of information that reinforce this view. First of all, Śri Śaṅkuka quotes a verse from the work of Dharmakirti, the great Buddhist philosopher of the 7th century. Although other later scholars such as Mahimabhatta, who were not Buddhist, quote him too. Secondly, the honorific Śri suggests Buddhist affiliation. Finally, Abhinavagupta appears to attribute to Śri Śaṅkuka a new understanding of the tragic rasa as general compassion rather than grief for the loss of a loved one, which fits with developments in Mahayana Buddhism. The cynosure of Shankuka's argument in connection with the theory of rasa is his systematic refutation of Lollada's views. Shankuka argues that rasa can only be inferred from what is depicted on the stage. This approach, which depends on anumana or inference, is described as anumitivada. To him, rasa was an experience to be inferred by the spectator. He, unlike Lollada, was interested in the manner in which the aesthetic experience evolved from the performance of or literary text. Shankuka refutes the theory of Lollada that rasa is sthayi bhava intensified on 8 grounds. First of all, Shankuka holds that if sthayi bhavas were the ones that turned into rasa in conjunction with aesthetic elements, sthayi bhavas would have been the subject and the rasas would have been their predicate. In that case, Bharata would have explained sthayi bhava first and rasas later. But Bharata does not follow this order. On the other hand, he explains sthayi bhavas later after explaining all the rasas in detail. In addition to this, if rasas were sthayi bhavas intensified, then why does sage Bharata describe the vibhavas and anubhavas of the rasas and then once again describe separately the vibhavas and anubhavas of the stable emotions? If rasas were mere intensification of sthayi bhava, it would have been sufficient that the vibhavas and anubhavas of only sthayi bhavas needed to be mentioned. But Bharata treats them separately. This means that Shankuka argues rasa is one thing and sthayi bhava another. Another point of contention from Shankuka is that if rasas were sthayi bhavas enhanced or intensified, then we would have had numerous rasas from the same sthayi bhavas. Since a sthayi bhava can be enhanced and intensified at various degrees from dull to duller to the dullest and so on, then there could have been innumerable rasas from intense to more intense to the most intense. The problem that Shankuka anticipates is that there could be numerous rasas from the same sthayi bhavas, given that the sthayi can get intensified at various degrees. So this theory does not hold. Now Shankuka anticipates an argument from the opponent. It could be argued that sthayi bhavas turn out to be rasas only if they reach the highest point of intensity. Shankuka has an argument against this observation as well. So this is how Shankuka defends. He says that this position is also equally faulty. Bharata mentions that Hasya Rasa has 6 varieties, namely Smita, Hasida, Vihasita, Upahasita, Apahasita and Adhihasita. But Hasya Rasa has only one sthayi bhava, which is Hasya. If Rasa were the sthayi bhava at the highest point of enhancement, then how do we get 6 varieties of Hasya Rasas from the single sthayi bhava called Hasa? The issue is not over here. Bharata mentions that the sthayi bhava Rati has 10 stages, with each later one relatively more intense than the previous. If we accept the position that Rasa is sthayi bhavas reaching the highest point of enhancement, then we should ideally have 10 varieties of Sringara Rasa. But that's not the case in reality. So the theory that it is the sthayi bhava at its highest point of enhancement that becomes the rasa stands flawed. According to Bhatta Lollata, emotions always progressively intensify to the highest level where it becomes a rasa. But according to Shankuka, this is not correct. What happens in reality, says Shankuka, is the opposite. Grief, for example, is powerful at first, and then it gradually weakens as opposed to getting strengthened. The intensity of emotions tends to decrease once it has reached the pinnacle. So, to say that rasa arises out of strengthened sthayi bhavas is again a fallacy. We saw that Shankuka is against the observation that rasa is sthayi bhava intensified. Then what is rasa according to Shankuka? According to Shankuka, rasa is the imitation of sthayi bhava in the character by the actor. When these emotions actually happen in real life, they are called sthayi bhavas. When the actors imitate the sthayi bhavas experienced by the characters, they are termed rasas. He was of the view that the vibhavas function as the cause of sthayi bhava in the character. Anubhavas are the effects of a particular or reactions to a particular sthayi bhava in the character imitated by the actor. And finally, Vyabhichari bhavas are the mental states an actor is supposed to emulate to represent the mental state of a character experiencing a particular sthayi bhava. Vyabhichari bhavas nourish the sthayi bhavas, and hence they are called the auxiliary causes. These aesthetic elements such as vibhavas, etc. indicate the presence of the sthayi bhava in a character. Shankuka also mentions three possibilities while a spectator is watching an actor playing the role of a character. Say for example, the character of Rama on stage. The first possibility is that the spectator may think that this is actually Rama. The second possibility is that the actor is not Rama. Thirdly, it could be thought that the actor may or may not be Rama. And finally, the actor is similar to Rama. Shankuka opines that an aesthetic experience is different from all these four possibilities, that is, the possibility of a true apprehension, a false one, a doubt, and a similitude. Shankuka says, there is no appearance of doubt or indeed of truth or falsehood. We have the thought, this is him, and not, this is actually him. We encounter no antithetical ideas, and so nothing makes us aware of the conflation. It is an experience we actually undergo, and what logical argument can confute such empirical evidence? Shankuka's theory does not allow the spectator to doubt the world of illusion created by the performance. He is famous for his citra-turaga-nyāya, or the theory of the painting of a horse. The viewer who sees the picture of a horse does not mistake it for the real horse. She or he cannot derive the full enjoyment from the picture unless they think this is a horse. During the process of aesthetic enjoyment, the viewer or the reader will be in a peculiar position where he or she neither takes the horse for real nor doubt its actuality. The feeling that this picture is similar to a horse, or the figure in the picture may or may not be a horse, will also not appear. The reality of the horse is inferred from the artistic depiction of the horse, and this gives rise to aesthetic pleasure or rasa. And for example, a viewer who watches Amjad Khan act as the villain Gabbar Singh in Sholay will hate Gabbar Singh, but not the real life actor called Amjad Khan. The rasa of bibhatsa that the spectator feels by watching Gabbar Singh is real in the world of art, but she or he does not extend it to the real world by hating Amjad Khan. According to Shankuka, the spectator experiences rasa by inferring the emotional aspects of the character through the depiction by the actor. This inference of aesthetic enjoyment, as Shankuka sees it, transcends all doubts about the real existence of the characters, and the spectators accept the world that the characters inhabit. It is important to keep in mind that Shankuka was primarily thinking of rasa in the context of the drama or rasa scene in the play. And so his idea of rasa was that which occurred in the audio-visual performance. Another important point that Shankuka takes up is the importance of the presentation of aesthetic elements or vibhavas, anubhavas, and vyabhichari bhavas in the depiction of rasa. He is of the view that aesthetic elements are imperative for the generation of rasa or aesthetic emotion. He criticizes Udbhada's view that rasa can be generated by mere reference to the proper name of the rasa. Shankuka's observation is worth quoting in this context. Shankuka observes, but we have no way of apprehending the stable emotions, not even from the literary narrative. The proper terms for them, desire, grief, and so on, simply render these things reference. Insofar as they denote them, they do not make us understand them as if they were verbal acting or expression. What Shankuka says is that rasa needs to be acted out or expressed to be inferred by the spectators or readers. Mere reference to the proper name of the rasa will not bring rasa into being. To explain this point further, Shankuka cites the following verses. Although my grief is distended, profound, endless, and vast, it is siphoned off by my anger, like the ocean's water by the submarine fire. In this line, the aesthetic emotion of grief is not properly acted out or verbally expressed by showing vibhavas, etc. So, we cannot have rasa here. Here, only that particular rasa is denoted by mentioning its proper name. I will explain this point with the help of a modern example. Suppose I say that I am suffering from grief. It will not generate rasa. In other words, my mere mention of the word grief will not invoke rasa in this context. Here, to invoke rasa, I should bring in appropriate vibhavas, vibhijari bhavas and anubhavas. If I explain in clear terms, in an aesthetically pleasing manner, that I am taking part in a battle where I am surrounded by enemies who shower arrows upon me. Here, by presenting the cause of my suffering, I have created a vibhava. And then, if I narrate my mental state at this moment and explain my reactions in a way that is distinctly different from the workday language or ordinary language, I will be able to generate vibhijari bhavas and appropriate anubhavas. In this situation, I will be able to create rasa. So the observation of Shankuka in a nutshell is that mere reference to the proper name of rasa is not sufficient to generate rasas. We need to introduce the appropriate vibhavas, anubhavas and vibhijari bhavas to generate rasa in a drama or a poem. One can safely say that there is a lot of similarities between T.S. Eliot's idea of objective correlative and Shankuka's observation that rasa cannot be produced in the absence of proper vibhava, anubhava and vibhijari bhavas. In his article, Rasa and the Objective Correlative, Krishnamurti attempts to show this similarity. According to Eliot, Shakespeare's Hamlet is an artistic failure because it lacks objective correlatives, which is a set of objects, situations, a chain of events which shall be the formula of that particular emotion. Eliot says that emotion cannot be described, rather it should be expressed through objective correlatives. According to Krishnamurti, rasa is the result of the conjunction of vibhava, anubhava and vibhijari bhavas, which are similar to Eliot's notion of objective correlative. He says, how does a poem present or convey an emotion? Sanskrit theory has an answer that is by no means unique to it. A poem does so through the objective correlatives of the emotion. Images, characters, situations which are the objective correlatives of the emotion are presented descriptively in a poem. And when the reader's mind makes contact with these, they awaken the corresponding stein within him and raise it to the state of rasa. So, throughout this comparative analysis, Krishnamurti draws the conclusion that both Bharata and Eliot have a consensus of opinion that objective correlatives create the locus of any work of art which is rasa or aesthetic emotion, so that the most significant formalist aspect which needs to be examined to judge a work of art is objective correlative. He says, this emotion is the meaning of the poem. Emotion is suggested exactly as any other kind of connotational meaning is by the words, by the denotative or descriptive elements embodied in words. These elements, the correlates of emotion, have existence only within the arrangement of words that the poem is. These objects of emotion, image, style, rhythm, story, character, are the only proper study of criticism, and criticism must study them within the verbal organization where and nowhere else they occur and belong. It is significant that unwittingly and variously these central assumptions of the Rasathwani theory are endorsed and restated in some of the most influential critical work of our time in Britain and America, that of Richards and Knights, Cleon Brooks and Wimsatt, and above all Eliot. Okay, now it's time to wind up the class. Let's review all the major points that we discussed today. So, we know that Shankuka was primarily criticizing the views of his predecessor Bhatta Lollada. Lollada argued that rasa is nothing but intensified aesthetic emotions. Shankuka refutes this observation of Lollada on 8 grounds. First of all, Shankuka observes that if rasas were sthayi bhavas in an intensified form, sthayi bhavas would have been the subject and rasas its predicate. If this were what Bharata had originally meant, then he would have explained sthayi bhavas first and then later rasas. This is not the case in Natya Shastra. Bharata mentions rasas first and then sthayi bhavas second. This means that Bharata does not consider rasa as sthayi bhavas intensified. Secondly, in Natya Shastra, Bharata mentions the vibhavas, anubhava and vyabhichari bhavas of sthayi bhavas and rasas separately. If rasas were the intensified form of sthayi bhavas, Bharata would not have mentioned the vibhavas, anubhavas and vyabhichari bhavas of sthayi bhavas and rasas separately. Thirdly, sthayi bhavas can get intensified at different degrees, from dull to duller to the dullest, or from the least intense to more intense and the most intense. In that case, there could be numerous rasas from the same sthayi bhava. This is not the case in reality. Fourth, the proponents of this view can also argue that, as opposed to Shankuka's claim, it could be argued that sthayi bhavas only at their highest point of intensity turn out to be rasas. This is also not correct. We have 5 varieties of hasya rasa and only one corresponding sthayi bhava, which is hasa. How come we get 6 varieties of hasya rasa from one sthayi bhava? If Lollada's view is correct, when hasa reaches the highest point, we will have only one rasa, which is hasya. But in reality, we have 6 varieties of the same hasya rasa. The 5th point is that if this view that all the sthayi bhavas in their highest point of enhancement turn out to be rasas, then we should ideally have 10 varieties of Shringara rasas. Since Bharata mentions 10 varieties of the sthayi bhava of Rati, this situation does not exist. So, how can Lollada say rasa is the enhanced sthayi bhava? Finally, moreover, according to Bhatta Lollada, emotions always progressively intensify to the highest level, at which point it becomes rasa. But what happens in reality, said Shankuka, is the opposite. Grief, for example, is the powerful at first and then it gradually weakens as opposed to getting strengthened. The intensity of emotions tends to decrease once it has reached the pinnacle. To say that, so rasa arises out of strengthened emotions or sthayi bhava, then is a fallacy. Then we saw the 4 possible impediments that can arise in the minds of a spectator while watching an actor playing the role of a particular character in a drama. The actor is really that character he is playing out. The actor may or may not be the character he is representing. The actor is not the character he is presenting. And finally, the actor is similar to the character. According to Shankuka, all these 4 possibilities, the possibility of similitude, doubt, similarity and falsehood, do not arise in the process of aesthetic experiment or experience or enjoyment. Finally, we saw Shankuka's observation that it is imperative that the aesthetic elements such as the vibhavas are necessary for the production of rasa in a work. It is impossible to generate rasa just by mentioning the name of that particular rasa. I hope you understood these points. Thank you.